From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Glynn Tonsor with this week's cattle market segment. He'll look at the favorable developments in beef demand of late and how the latest concerns about the general economy could become a factor once again. Also today, K-State's Justin Waggoner will discuss starter feeding management for weaned calves with the focus on daily feed intake targets to assure a smooth transition to the growing diet. And we'll hear again from Kansas FFA state reporter Miranda Depenbusch. She'll provide her wrap-up report on the National FFA Convention, which concluded over the weekend. And later, Sarah Moyer has this week's 4-H segment. She'll visit with K-State's Beth Hinshaw about making new 4-H club members feel welcome. All this right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Thanks for being along with us. This is Agriculture Today. Well, for once, we can speak in a positive vein about the cattle market trends. Glynn Tonsor is along. He's a livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension, and the cattle trade has been basically trudging along with very little movement up to last week, and thankfully to the upside, Glynn.
Yeah, on balance, we were up, and I think there's some reasons for optimism I'll walk us through, and then some words of caution, of course, I'll end our discussion with. But let's just break down the numbers from last week. First, the December live cattle contract closed at about 118.5 on Friday. That was up $1.50. The cash trade was also up about $1. 5 market price was 111.25, and that's not notably different from before, but it was up $1, as you said. So we finally kind of broke and moved some cattle. When we went to feeder cattle, the November feeder cattle contract was $154.80, almost $155, up a little less than $1 for the week. You look at the cash trade for feeder cattle, that's kind of a mixed story, the way AMS called it. They summarized it as +2 to -2, depending on what market you look at. Probably the biggest change from the last 2 or 3 weeks was the weather was more cooperative. We were able, Mother Nature allowed us to move cattle. But even there, you got to put in a word of caution, as there's several reports in Nebraska, Dakotas, and I believe even western Iowa where getting trucks was a challenge. Again, this time of year, we're trying to move a lot of grain as well. So transportation issues are not going away. And couple that with weather, we have to monitor that in a heavy feeder cattle volume period. Some specifics here. The Dodge City report on Wednesday was called flat, basically. Some of the lighter weight, unweaned, maybe a little bit rougher, were down $5 to $10, but on balance, AMS called it as flat. 2 lots I wrote it down for note here is 190 head at 576 pounds, sold at 160 and change, and then a lot of 240 head weighing 8 1/4, traded at 155 almost. So those are down just a hair from maybe 2 weeks before, but still, for big picture context, better than we were anticipating this time of year.
And coupled with that good news, at least decent news, on the beef demand side.
Yeah, so I think it's worth, and I'll do this separately, is summarizing what the weekly cutout numbers were and then give us the monthly cold storage report update, because that gives us a snapshot, as you said, on kind of the meat situation. First, the weekly cutout numbers, 213.5 was where we closed Friday on the choice cutout. That was up a full $5.50 for the week, plus 3% increase from the prior week, which was really good. And before I leave the choice aspect of that, I'll highlight that's up 5% year over year. So we're $10 higher than we were same week back in 2017. And if you go even further and dig into the choice cutout by primal, we'll see that this past week's gains were led by the rib and round, and that fits into a broader story that the year-over-year gains I was alluding to actually led not just by the rib and round, but loin and brisket are up year-over-year as well. Only one group, and it's the chuck, is down year-over-year. And I make that last point because there's been some concern, and rightly so, that we wanted all the primals ideally to be contributing, not to have a weak part of the carcass, if you like. And at least on the year-to-date numbers, I rattled off, brisket's up 13% year-over-year, rib 9, loin 6, round 5. That's a pretty diverse mix parts of the animal. There's different consumption patterns and products that come from that and so forth. And I highlight that because that's a little bit more of a stable base, right, of where that demand strength is coming from, if you like, on the cutout, which is good. If we back up to this past week, the select cutout was just under $1.99, up about $4.50 for the week, and again, up a little more than $6 from last year. Underpinning that in a broad context would be the cold storage report. So a week ago today, USDA released, and that'd be October on 22nd, the cold storage report. And that just gives us a snapshot of supplies that are like in transit, post-harvest, but have yet to find their final market. And we get that for beef, pork, and poultry. First, on the beef side, supplies are up 1% from the prior month and 3% from the prior year. That's not surprising given the production volumes we have going on. To me, the fact those aren't up 5 or 10% is the relevant point. So I'd say that's good. That's consistent with ongoing movement of product. On the pork side, compared to the prior month, supplies were up 1% and actually down 5% from the same month a year ago. A little subpoint there I wrote down was hams are up 5% from the prior month. That could be worse given our recent trade uncertainties with Mexico and so forth. The Mexican market is huge, in particular for the ham market. And prior to that report, I would have anticipated maybe a few more hams sitting and waiting and backlogged and so forth, given the number of hogs we've had going through the system. And I'm just using that as an example of, even though you have year-over-year increases, it quote-unquote could be worse. I would summarize the beef and pork numbers as both examples that we are still moving product despite the fact we're producing a lot. So indirectly, that's a confirmation of a good demand situation. On the poultry side, we're flat on supplies from the prior month. We are up 10% from the prior year. So maybe the bearish word of caution that's in this report from a big picture perspective is we continue to, quote unquote, have a lot of poultry sitting there compared to last year that we've got to find a home for. On balance, that report is positive, and I think was one of the reasons the cutout values were positive this past week, and that, of course, is related to that $1 increase in fed cattle we had. My opening remarks, I said maybe some reasons for optimism this coming week. They're largely tied to that cutout increase we saw last week.
But all of these numbers, the cutout from last week, the cold storage report, they really put down a solid foundation for this market for a time, it would seem.
Yes, and gives us the ability to quote-unquote absorb hiccups and that kind of stuff. Most of our listeners probably noticed either directly or indirectly a lot of choppiness in the stock market last week. There is a host of gray clouds on the horizon that have people concerned. Discussions about increasing interest rates and, the full impact of tariffs on our economy and those kind of things are underscoring the volatility in the stock market. And I'm highlighting that from a meat and livestock industry perspective, simply to remind everybody that meat protein is a expensive component of our food diet, where the demand for those meat products goes up when incomes, and more broadly here, just global GDP goes up. But when we have adverse economic development, we see demand push back on meat products, and beef even more so as the more expensive product. We see that. And this is more just a word of caution. I'm not here saying the recession's around the corner. Please don't take it that way. But some of the uncertainty we saw this week in the markets is worth noting. And maybe the best way to make that point is it's been several years now, but the 2008-2010 period, the Great Recession here in the U.S., was not a good period for meat demand. And this week should give us some caution to think about that again.
You have been tracking closely as well, Glynn, the latest trends in steer dressed weights, and you think that that's worth producers' attention as well.
Yeah, whether you're a fed cattle or feeder cattle producer, I think it's good that marketing information and coupled with that is dressed weights and live weights have done pretty well. Narrowly since June, we've kept our weights in check compared to the prior year. The reason I'm highlighting here is it is one of the points of confirmation that we are moving and quote-unquote staying current. That's good. But again, in the spirit of caution going forward, everywhere I drive in this country, we're talking and or seeing piles of grain. Parts of this country, we have what I would call farmer feeders, folks that raise their own grain, and they might have more of it than in the past. And that can impact their personal incentives on what the quote-unquote optimal selling weight for them is. They might put a different value on that grain than somebody else that didn't produce it. Going forward, I will be closely monitoring those weights because there might be some individual incentives to have heavier cattle that can create some adverse national problems. I'll remind our listeners in 2015, we actually had a quote-unquote spike in finished weights. Folks to the north of here in particular were selling heavier animals. And for those that have a business relationship that's tied to the 5 market fed cattle price, that's particularly worth noting because that's a blend of cattle from 5 major states, and the on-the-ground incentives for weights varies a lot in those 5 different states is the reason I'm bringing it up.
Final note here, and we spoke with your colleague out of Oklahoma State University, Darrell Peel, last week about wheat pasturing prospects. And you're watching this as well, and things are shaping up that we may well see terrific opportunities for putting calves on wheat ground in the coming weeks. In fact, to the point where we may see more of this emerge, do you think?
Well, I think in the immediate term, we're already talking about folks thinking about buying feeder cattle, putting weight on a wheat pasture, and that has been a big part of optimism that's been supporting feeder cattle prices. The reason I'm highlighting here is I don't think it's just over the next few weeks worth monitoring. One of the meetings I was at earlier this past week, listening to my colleagues on the grain side talking about a more aggregate national acreage shift they think is coming. It's beyond my pay grade to tell you exactly what that is, but on balance was an increase in wheat acres is what's expected, not necessarily just in Kansas, but for the country. And I'm highlighting that for maybe the next 2 or 3 years, if we have a shift there, is it's not just the next 2 or 3 weeks to talk about that. A lot of the decisions tied to that have already kind of been made, but going forward, there may be some people who previously grazed and didn't have access to wheat acres because it's kind of left their area or, there's fewer acres around them available, that it would not surprise me if this time next year there's more acreage available for that. So my point is less about, the conditions in the field being a little wet and getting cattle out there right now, which I'm guessing is what Darrell was talking about. But a year from now, maybe even 2 years from now, some of our listeners who previously have experience with that, who maybe haven't been able to get the acres recently, might have a chance. Or, another version of that, they currently have access to 200 acres and it might be 500 next year, that kind of thing. It's mainly a year out planning kind of point is I think there's some macroeconomic acreage shift forces that might bring those wheat acres back that cattle producers are listening might want to think about.
And that translates then into a potential boost in feeder cattle demand then.
That's correct. And or just a general shift in the, if you like, the ways we could put pounds on. We're less dependent on putting it on the corn on balance in a feedlot. So that in itself is good too, is the industry as a whole has, maybe another wrench in the toolbox, so to speak, on how we could put pounds on in the feeder cattle complex.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic to think about going forward. Glynn, we always appreciate your input. Thanks for coming over.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
That's our weekly cattle market segment featuring livestock economist Glynn Tonsor of K-State Research and Extension, and Agriculture Today returns after this over the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today continues now. Well, some thoughts for those of you who are starting those weaned calves on feed. As you head them into the dry lot situation, there's an important transition period for your management to conquer here, if you will. We'll talk about some thoughts along that line now from Justin Waggoner. Justin is the Research and Extension Beef Systems Specialist for K-State, based in southwest Kansas. One of the things you note as we get into this subject, Justin, is that the recent weather may have complicated this process.
So that's for sure, Eric. I know we've got a lot of operations that are either have weaned calves or are looking to wean calves here in very short order. Right now in Kansas, we've seen everything from snow to back up into the 70s and freezing temps at night. And so I think the term variable in terms of our weather would be pretty descriptive or accurate descriptor right now. And so that can create some challenges, especially as we look at bringing a set of new calves into some pens and getting through the weaning period. A big challenge when we're dealing with weather variations like this, if we've done everything, even doing everything else right, it can still be a challenge sometimes to get calves up and to get them to consume feed out of a bunk.
So what are some of the secrets to bunk breaking those calves in these conditions?
So I think one of the early things is maybe to start ahead of the weaning period. We know from previous research that we've done here at K-State that simply just exposing calves to the supplement or even the weaning ration while they're on pasture or still with their dam, even if it is a small amount, can pay some benefits during the receiving period when we bring those calves in. So, essentially exposing those calves to the feed stuff maybe 2 to 3 times prior to bringing them into the weaning pen. I think that's one of the things that we can do to start up front, really help those calves make that transition once we go ahead and wean them. Mm-hmm. Another thing that we can do is to kind of understand how those calves and how much feed those calves are going to eat when they do come into the pens. A lot of times on newly weaned calves, or even high-stress calves coming into a feed yard, we know our intake levels are going to be relatively low, somewhere around 1% of body weight. And what can happen in some situations, especially with the weather patterns, is you'll see cattle, they're not eating a whole lot of feed, and then over the course of 2 to 3 days, they become a little bit more aggressive, and the temptation of most producers is to put more feed in front of them. Mm-hmm. And actually, as we can be beneficial in those times, is to actually keep those calves a little more aggressive and fight that temptation. So, a lot of times if we start those calves out at 1% of body weight in dry feed per day in terms of our delivery, and we step that up by about 0.2%, so we go from 1 to 1.2, et cetera, as we begin to step those calves up and really keep those calves a little bit aggressive, especially for 2 to 3 days. If we do see those calves want to come up and become a little bit more aggressive in that feed consumption, essentially kind of hold them back just a little bit initially. And a lot of times what we see when we do that and keeping those calves aggressive is we're actually ahead in terms of intake at about day 7 or 10 down the road on those calves that we've maybe been a little more stepped them up in a stepwise fashion.
So in addition to managing that intake rate and easing them into that diet you're using, exactly what would be the best feed stuff here in terms of a concentrate or a balance of a concentrate and a forage?
Yeah, that's a good question, Eric. So there's lots of different combinations out there that can work to wean calves on, or a transition ration. Everything from commercially available starter pellets to even a total mixed ration. There's a couple things. One, because those calves are not going to consume a whole lot of feed, they don't initially coming into the pens. We know it's going to be a ration that's going to be relatively concentrated. So, in terms of the nutrients that would have in it. So, in terms of protein level, we're probably looking at something that's going to have a minimum of about 16% protein, and we're probably looking at an energy level somewhere around that 0.45 megacalories of NEG per pound. Now, in terms of starting calves on feed, a lot of times we may have a weaning ration, and I like to couple that with some sort of high-quality grass hay. Calves are pretty familiar with that hay, and a lot of times we can use that type of hay to draw those calves into the bunk and get them to actually maybe consume a little bit of our ration if we need to.
And back to the intake for a moment as one pushes further, once that calf becomes more acclimated to the starter diet. Consistently ramp that rate up. Where does one go from there?
Yeah, so initially we're going to start at around that 1% of dry intake that I discussed earlier. And I think a really good benchmark is that by day 7 to 10, we'd like to have those calves consuming in total, if we're doing hay or some sort of combination of starter pellet. Obviously, with some of those, there is some target intakes. But in general, we'd like to have those calves consuming around 2% of their body weight on a dry basis by days 7 to 10 of coming into the pens. That's about where our maintenance level should be. So if you look at the combination of feedstuffs, if you are one of those producers that's maybe feeding some sort of a ration but is also putting a little bit of hay in the bunk, just doing some checks to make sure that, okay, we are at about this 2% in terms of total dry intake on these calves is a really good benchmark. And a lot of times what we see is calves will pretty easily be around that 2.2, maybe on up to 2.5 by day 14. So kind of use that as a benchmark. If you know the weight of those calves, you can work backwards to that and kind of see where that intake level should be.
And does one introduce at some point here an ionophore in the ration?
Well, if it's in some cases that's easier to do than others. There's a lot of commercial products that are out there. If we're using some sort of a starter pellet, a lot of times those products are going to be already included in there. What we do need to do is follow the directions for the calf that we're feeding. Obviously there's some differences there between the different product choices that we have, and maybe even looking at some other products that might be beneficial during that time frame as well.
But really, the basic thought here is that one can customize that starter ration favorably as long as they stay on top of that intake and manage appropriately.
Yeah, for me, I think on those calves, especially with the challenges that the weather has thrown at it, I think really the goal, really any time, but maybe even more so this year, is to get those calves to consume dry feed when they come into the pens, and then manage that intake in a manner that's, especially during those first 3 to 5 days when those calves come into the pen, that they're going to be relatively aggressive and kind of stay on feed and take them up in a stepwise fashion.
Very well. Before we let you go, we do want to let folks know about an event you'll be involved with. This is part of a rotating program through 5 states, including Kansas. Sensibly enough, it's known as the 5-State Beef Conference. K-State Research and Extension is a co-sponsor, and the Kansas stopover is coming up fairly soon, right?
That's correct, Eric. This year, our 5-State Beef Conference, which is, essentially centers around the 5-state areas you mentioned, is going to be in Greensburg, Kansas on November 13th. Kind of a late afternoon/evening meeting. We kind of get started around 3 o'clock. One of the exciting components of the program that I think we're really fortunate to have on there is Stan Beavers, who's formerly with Texas A&M and is really kind of known for the SPA data set of kind of looking at key performance indicators and maybe determining where your ranch excels or maybe where it doesn't. We know there's certainly a lot of operations that have been looking closer at their bottom line in terms of the profit, especially on the cow-calf side. Another topic that we've got a speaker on this year is going to be on cash values and rental rates for ag land with Michael Taylor from our Kansas State shop there in Manhattan. Ironically, we talked a little bit about the variability in weather, and that's one of the things we're going to also cover in Greensburg on our 5-state program. Is we'll have Jeff Becerra, who's with the School of Meteorology at the University of Oklahoma, and he's going to address some of the recent variability that we've seen in our climate and just how that's impacting agriculture, and maybe take a look at that in terms of the global perspectives as well. And then one of the things we try to do every so often on this program is really try to put some of our recent research at the host institutions, which would be New Mexico State, Oklahoma State, Texas A&M, and then K-State, in front of producers. And so we have a research update where we're bringing in Stacy Gunter with the USDA ARS station that's located down in Woodward, really straight south of where we're going to be at in Greensburg. Ryan Reuter with Oklahoma State, and then Dale Blasey from K-State is going to discuss some of the recent K-State research that might have some application to cow-calf and stocker producers in the region.
Great program coming up again on the 13th of November, and very affordable, $10 per person if you get your RSVP in by Thursday, November the 8th. And you'd encourage folks to contact the host county, Kiowa County Extension, to reserve their spot, right?
That's correct. We do ask that they register or pre-register just to help us in the planning of the meeting, and so I think it's going to be a good program for us.
Good luck with it. Again, that is on Tuesday, November 13th from 2:30, where registration begins, into the evening. And you can find out more at the ksubeef.org website. You can also contact the Kiowa County Extension Office, 620-723-2156 for more information. Justin, for all of this, thank you, and we will talk again very soon.
There you go.
Justin Waggoner is a Research and Extension Beef Systems Specialist at Kansas State University. We'll be back with more on this Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggle to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. The 91st National FFA Convention came to a close this past Saturday. And as you know, the past couple of broadcasts, we've been speaking with the Kansas FFA state reporter, Miranda Depenbusch, about what's been going on at the convention. She's back in Manhattan now, back from Indianapolis, and to give us a quick recap of some of the things that developed on Friday and then the final day on Saturday. We do need to acknowledge right out, Miranda, that there was a Kansas FFA member up for national office. Unfortunately, she didn't quite get to the finish line there on that, but we do want to, again, acknowledge her for making the final cut is a very important achievement unto itself.
Yes, we very much wanted to congratulate Elizabeth Meyer for making it into the final cut. She is originally from Marion FFA, and she is such a amazing individual. She's majoring in agriculture education, so we are excited that she's still going to be involved with agriculture and FFA in the future, and we're excited to see the amazing things that she does here to come.
Well, Kansas FFA, very proud of Elizabeth. So some of the recognitions that Kansas FFAers gained during that last day and a half of convention, you say there were honorary American FFA degrees bestowed upon several Kansans.
Yes, we would like to congratulate Tom Henner, Dr. John Ulmer, Jeff Hines, John Kern, and Ryan Miller for having honorary FFA degrees.
And those are bestowed upon individuals who have supported FFA in various ways over the years, correct?
Yes, sir.
So congratulations to all of those individuals. How about the career development events in agriculture? Several individuals from Kansas were up for various honors in those respective areas. Did we have anybody stand out there?
Yes, we were very excited to see Dalton Flatt from Cherryvale FFA. He placed first, the highest individual in livestock judging.
And that's an enormous achievement, to say the least, Miranda.
Yes.
Dalton Flatt from the Cherryvale FFA was the top individual once again in the career development event in livestock, and the hearty congratulations to him as well. And there was a proficiency award winner from Kansas likewise, you say?
Yes, in dairy placement. So we were very excited to have a winner for the proficiency award. His name was John Ocken from Ulysses FFA.
That was the Dairy Production Proficiency Award. John Ocken of the Ulysses chapter finishing top in the nation in that area, so congratulations to him. And when we last spoke, last Friday morning, you were, along with your other fellow state officers, heading to a technology session. Must have been some interesting things that you saw there.
Yes, the Blue Room was really awesome. There were different booths showing different technology that is going to be implemented into agriculture in the coming years. So we were able to see a little bit about that. I got to put on a virtual reality headset and learn about poultry production. And there were countless booths. I wasn't able to go to them all, but it was really cool. And then there were some speakers talking about technology implemented in agriculture as well. So it was really interesting, and not many FFA members were able to go in there because it was such a small room. But I was excited to hear from the FFA members that were able to attend and go see a glimpse of what's to come.
Well, we appreciate you taking a few moments the last three broadcasts to speak with us and to share some of the high points of the convention as they pertain to Kansas FFA members and chapters. And we wish you the best as you fulfill your stint as the state reporter, Miranda. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Again, she is originally from the Udall FFA chapter in south central Kansas, the current state reporter for the Kansas FFA, Miranda Depenbusch. And some concluding thoughts upon the 91st annual FFA convention, which took place this past week into the weekend in Indianapolis. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and now it's on to the weekly feature from the Kansas Forest Service, Kansas State University, Tree Tales. Here's K-State Forester Bob Atchison. Bob?
Our trees are putting on fall color, and as soon as the ground dries out and crops are finally harvested, we'll be entering another season most farmers and ranchers usually don't think about. Fall and winter is when most of our timber is harvested in Kansas. Over 251 million board feet annually, according to the latest figures. Often, farmers and ranchers are approached by a single timber buyer and are surprised that their trees are worth anything. For this reason, many timber sales occur without a written contract and without testing fair market value by inviting more than one timber buyer to make an offer. This is unfortunate since bid offers can sometimes vary by thousands of dollars. Usually, it takes 15 to 20 good quality trees like black walnut or bur oak to attract enough interest from timber buyers for bidding to occur. A list of Kansas timber buyers is available on the web at www.kansasforest.org. To establish fair market value, landowners should contact several, if not all, timber buyers on the list and invite them to make an offer. Landowners will need to provide timber buyers some basic information such as the number and type of trees for sale, average diameters, location, contact information, and the date and time when bids will be reviewed. Specific terms of the sale should be identified and a lump sum payment made by the timber buyer before any cutting begins. Landowners always have the right to accept or reject any or all of the bids. Once a bid is accepted, the timber buyer should be notified immediately and a sale agreement or contract prepared that includes terms of payment, time allowed to complete harvest, liability, and title to the property. Good quality walnut drives most sales, but on good sites, black walnut will not be financially mature until it reaches 24 to 28 inches in diameter. Lower quality walnut can be sold at younger sizes, but in most cases, trees less than 16 inches in diameter should not be sold. Kansas Forest Service is available to help guide farmers and ranchers through a proper timber sale. For help, give us a call at 785-532-3310 or check us out on the web at www.kansasforest.org. This is Bob Atchison with the Kansas Forest Service. You've been listening to another Tree Tale.
Many thanks, Bob, as always. One more reminder that the 179th Landon Lecture at K-State is set for this Thursday morning, and it will feature U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue. The venue, McCain Auditorium, the time 10:30 on Thursday, November the 1st. The public is invited. The lecture is free. We hope if you're in the area, you can attend. This is Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. I'm Sarah Moyer. It's time for our weekly 4-H segment, and the fall season is a popular time of year for youth to join 4-H clubs. Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Hinshaw calls in now to share information with us about welcoming these potential members to a club. Thanks for coming on, Beth.
Certainly. Thanks, Sarah.
When a potential member comes to a club, he or she may think of a mix of questions they have after experiencing a meeting. How would you like to remind people about that experience?
You know, I think all of us as people can remember back to a time where we had to go into a situation where, you know, it was a room full of people who maybe all knew each other and we were the new person. And there's just a little bit of uncomfortable feeling with that. And with some people, even a lot of being uncomfortable. And so I think it's important for us to always think about that as new people come to our clubs. And, you know, this is the really key season for that. We have lots of young people and their families visiting 4-H clubs right now because the new 4-H year has just started. And so I think it's just important to remember how those folks might be feeling when they come into your club. And one of the life skills that 4-H helps teach young people is that art of hospitality and making others feel welcome. So this is a really good opportunity for us to practice those skills.
Current members might invite a friend to a meeting or be welcoming someone into the club, but whose responsibility is it to help with that welcoming and that hospitality at a club meeting?
A lot of our clubs have a new family coordinator, and certainly we want them to be involved, but we want the entire club to understand that they have a role in hospitality and a role in welcoming new people. I'm glad that you brought up about 4-Hers bringing their friends as potential members, because certainly they have a big responsibility as the host or hostess for that person, and, really helping them get acquainted in the club. And so, they already have somebody who's going to really help do that. Their friend invited them. But we have other families who they got the information about the 4-H club. Maybe they don't know anybody there. So when they show up, we still have to have a plan for how they're going to be welcomed to the club. A number of clubs even have a welcome committee, and I think that's a great idea to just have people there at the door greeting people. You also want to think about maybe a name tag for the new people so they can be called by name. And I think name tags are a good idea for the whole club, actually, because there's other people who maybe haven't been around as much and don't know each other, and it just helps people feel more comfortable.
What type of information should be shared with potential members and their family?
Well, there's a lot of information that can be shared. Definitely, as the club meeting goes on, there's some things that, a new family might not understand, like how does the club meeting work? You've got the banners up that have the motto or that have the 4-H pledge on them. Explain that we're going to be saying those, because if you're new to 4-H, those are going to be something you've never heard of before. I think it's also important that maybe we have something to send home with the family that talks about how you enroll through 4-H online, when our next meeting is going to be, and then also a phone number of a leader or officers that they can call with questions before that next meeting starts.
Sounds like good information to include on an agenda or something else at the meeting. Beth, would you go over how running an efficient meeting might be beneficial to welcoming new members?
Certainly. And sometimes our meetings in the fall, especially the one where we elect our new officers, that might be a little bit longer meeting. But an efficient meeting really is important because that makes everything short and snappy, and it doesn't drag on. And, new people may not really understand what's going on there. Another thing that I think is really important at the meeting is to have one of your 4-H families or 4-H members designated to sit with that new member to maybe tell them what's going on as it's happening, answer their questions as it's happening. The other thing is 4-H meetings are a great place where we come together once a month as a club and work on our goals and get our business taken care of. But we definitely want to invite these new families and new potential 4-H members to get involved in some way. And so if that's some kind of a county or district-wide activity that's going on, if it's a service activity that's going on, the sooner people can get involved and be hands-on with 4-H, the more they're going to like it and get better acquainted with the other members and feel really welcome and included.
There may be several opportunities for service projects or activities here in the fall with holidays coming up. Some good advice. Any other comments for 4-H members as they welcome potential members, Beth?
Well, this is the way we grow, and we want as many people as possible to have a 4-H opportunity. So I just think that's really important to remember that for us to grow 4-H, we have to invite people into 4-H, and then we have to make them feel welcome in 4-H.
Thank you very much for coming on and sharing with us today.
Thanks, Sarah.
That once again was Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Hinshaw talking about welcoming potential members into a 4-H club. As she mentioned early on, the 4-H calendar flipped over here in October to begin the new year. A great time for people to join and get involved with 4-H. If you know someone who is interested in 4-H, have them contact their local 4-H extension office, and the website for enrollment is 4honline.com. You select Kansas from the list of states and can proceed from there. Once again, Beth shared several notes there on hospitality and how to make sure that they're following along with what's happening in a meeting and getting the information they need to be excited about 4-H. Listen in next Monday for another 4-H feature. That is all the time we have for today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Sarah Moyer. You've been listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.